In the beginning, before time as we know it unfolded, there was silence. The heavens and the earth were not yet formed as we see them today, and the world waited for its first heartbeat. In that divine silence, the command was given. From the dust of the earth, from the essence of clay itself, a form began to take shape, not by accident, not by evolution, but by intention. Every curve of his being, every breath that would one day fill his lungs, was shaped with care and purpose. It was the creation of Adam, the first human, the one who would carry the trust of life, consciousness, and choice. As the clay was gathered, it was not like any other creation. Angels watched, curious and silent, for they had seen many forms before: the mountains, the oceans, the creatures that roamed, but never something like this. There was something different in the way this figure was molded, something deeper, something that felt destined. His creation was not just physical, it was symbolic. The clay represented the earth, humble, mixed, and patient, and through it, humanity would always be reminded of its origins. No matter how high one might rise, no matter how much knowledge one might gain, every human would still come from the dust beneath their feet. As his form was completed, it stood still, lifeless, yet magnificent. The angels continued to gaze, perhaps wondering what this new being would mean for creation. Then came a moment that changed the course of existence. From the unseen world, a breath, not just of air, but of life, entered the clay form, and in that instant, what was once cold and still came alive. The lifeless eyes began to see, the motionless hands began to move, and the silent lips drew their first breath. It was not an ordinary breath. It was the first breath of humanity. When Adam opened his eyes, for the first time he saw light, beauty, and peace all around him. Imagine his wonder as he looked upon the vastness of creation, the radiant skies above, and the green gardens that stretched endlessly. He was the first to witness the world in its purity, untouched by corruption or pain. There was no noise of chaos, no echo of sin, only calmness, harmony, and divine perfection. Everything around him was in balance. Every sound was gentle, and every color reflected the beauty of its creator. At first, Adam did not know what he was or why he had been made. There was a sense of innocence in his curiosity. He looked at his own hands, feeling their strength yet not knowing their purpose. He touched the earth from which he was made, feeling a strange connection to it, as though it was both his origin and his home. He walked among the trees, the rivers, and the creatures, and though all were living, none were like him. He was aware, conscious, and capable of thought. This awareness was his gift, the first sign of what would later be called intellect and spirit. But creation was not only about forming a body, it was about giving meaning to that body. Adam was given something that no other creation had: the ability to think, to reason, and to make choices. He could feel gratitude, curiosity, love, and awe. These were not just emotions. They were reflections of the divine attributes instilled within him. The first feeling he ever knew was wonder. The second was humility. For as he looked around, he realized that everything before him, the sky, the trees, the light, had been created before him, for him, yet none of it truly belonged to him. He was a guest in a vast, perfect garden. As Adam began to understand his surroundings, he noticed that the world responded to him. The wind moved softly when he walked, and the creatures turned their gaze toward him in calm submission. He was given honor, even before he understood what honor was. And deep within him, he felt something that every human since has felt: the need to understand why he existed. That question, unspoken but powerful, was the first sign of humanity's eternal search for meaning. There was beauty in his solitude, But there was also a quiet emptiness. He could see the wonders around him, but he could not share his thoughts with another. It was in that solitude that Adam began to truly reflect on his existence. He observed the rhythm of nature, the harmony of life, and perhaps began to feel that all of it pointed back to something greater than himself. That realization, that sense of purpose, was the beginning of his spiritual awakening. Time passed, and with each moment, Adam grew in awareness. He learned to move, to think, and to understand. He discovered sound and the ability to speak. His first words were pure and filled with awe, for he was not speaking to creation, but to the one who had created him. The act of speaking itself was sacred, for language was not learned, it was bestowed. The power to name, to identify, to express. That was what set him apart. Every word he uttered carried the rhythm of his soul and the depth of divine intent. When the light of creation settled upon the newly awakened being, the divine purpose began to unfold in the most delicate way. Adam had been shaped from clay, given life by a breath of mercy. But his story was not complete. The one who had made him wanted him to know, to understand, and to think. So began the second part of his journey, the awakening of the mind, the moment when knowledge entered the heart of the first human. No, in the beginning, Adam stood amidst the wonders of creation, surrounded by beauty yet unaware of its meaning. He could see the colors of the garden, the streams that shimmered like silver, and the skies that changed hues with every breath of the wind, but he did not yet know what they were or why they existed. The trees were tall and generous, their fruits abundant, yet they were just shapes to him. The animals moved gracefully around him, each with purpose, but their names and natures were still a mystery. Hero? It was then that the divine command came to teach him. From the unseen words began to flow into his heart, like streams of light. The knowledge was not learned through effort or struggle. It was gifted. He began to understand the language of creation, how everything had a name, a meaning, and a place in the grand design. The wind was no longer just a breeze, it became a messenger. The stars were no longer distant fires, they were signs of order and guidance. The earth beneath him was not merely soil, it was a cradle of life. Adam began to see connections between all things. He realized that every leaf had a purpose. Every sound carried a rhythm, and every creature moved according to a law greater than itself. Passion filled his heart with awe. He was the first to understand the balance of the world, how light and darkness danced in harmony, how water gave life, and how silence itself was filled with meaning. For the first time, he could name what he saw, and by naming it, he understood it. The angels who had witnessed his creation watched in silence as this transformation took place. They had known many creations before, beings of light and fire, each devoted to worship and obedience. But this new being, made from clay, was different. He possessed something extraordinary, the ability to know beyond instinct, to question, to learn, and to teach. This was the gift that set him apart. As knowledge filled Adam's heart, he felt a deep sense of connection with the world around him. He realized that learning was not just about understanding things. It was about recognizing the signs of their creator in everything. The movement of the clouds, the melody of flowing water, the whisper of the leaves, all were lessons written in the language of creation. The more he observed, the more he understood that everything was interconnected, bound together by wisdom and intention. One can imagine Adam walking through the garden, whispering softly as he named each creature, each tree, each stone. As his lips formed the words, he felt their essence echo within his soul. Knowledge gave him not only understanding, but also humility, for he realized how vast creation was and how little he still knew. This awareness was not a burden, but a blessing. for it opened within him the desire to seek, reflect, and to continue learning. You know, the beauty of knowledge was that it brought balance. Adam began to understand the meaning of harmony, how giving and taking, rest and movement, silence and speech, all had their time. He saw that every creature lived in its place and played its part. There was no chaos in the divine design, only perfect order hidden beneath apparent differences. This understanding became the seed of wisdom within him. In that sacred moment of realization, Adam understood that knowledge was not merely for power or pride. It was a trust, a sacred responsibility. The ability to think meant he could choose, and the ability to know meant he could guide. His awareness gave him purpose, to nurture what had been entrusted to him, and to pass on what he had learned. This was not just a lesson for him, but for all who would come after him. Carol? There were moments when Adam would sit beside the flowing streams, watching the reflections of the sky ripple upon the surface of the water. In those moments, he understood that learning was not about collecting facts, but about seeing patterns. The way day followed night, the way a seed turned into a tree, the way silence carried peace. He began to understand that true knowledge came with humility. For every mystery he understood, 10 more unfolded before him. This endless depth of learning drew him closer to the one who had taught him. And so knowledge became light, not the kind that shines upon the eyes, but the kind that illuminates the soul. It was as though his heart had become a mirror, reflecting divine wisdom into the world. When he spoke, creation seemed to respond. The birds sang, the wind danced through the trees, and the garden itself, time in the garden, moved unlike anywhere else. There was no sense of night or day, only light that shifted gently like breath. The air was filled with fragrance and peace, and everything seemed to live in perfect harmony. The trees swayed softly, the streams hummed their melodies, and the wind whispered songs of serenity. Adam lived in that peace, surrounded by beauty beyond imagination. He walked among rivers that shimmered like liquid glass, and under canopies of golden light. Every sound, every breeze, and every color spoke to him of balance and grace. Yet, within that perfection, there lay a lesson he had not yet learned. For all his knowledge and awareness, Adam was still new to choice. He understood the names of things, the patterns of creation, and the order of life. But he had not yet felt what it meant to decide between desire and discipline. The garden was vast, filled with blessings beyond measure, and everything was open to him. Everything but one. There stood a tree unlike the others. Its trunk was old and strong, its branches stretched high into the clouds, and its fruits glowed with an allure that was both mysterious and beautiful. It was not forbidden because it was evil, but because it was a boundary, a mark to teach that even in paradise, freedom must walk hand in hand with restraint. At first Adam paid little attention to it. The garden was full of wonders, and he had no reason to want what was withheld. He roamed freely, naming the streams, and walking among the flowers that changed color when touched by light. But as time passed, the tree began to stir his thoughts. He would look at it from afar and wonder why it was different. He never approached with rebellion, only curiosity, a whisper of thought asking, what would happen if? That whisper grew not from hunger, but from the mystery of the unknown. Knowledge had awakened his mind, and the unknown called to it. In the quiet of the garden, he could feel that question echo inside him. The more he tried to silence it, the louder it became. And there, unseen but aware, waited one who had already chosen pride over obedience. The deceiver moved among the shadows of the garden, unseen like the wind, whispering words coated in sweetness, but heavy with deceit. The voice came not as a threat, but as gentle persuasion, a tone that blended with his own thoughts. It whispered of knowledge, of power, of the promise of becoming more than he was. It told him that perhaps the tree was not a boundary, but a gate, a secret path to something greater. The voice painted temptation not as disobedience, but as enlightenment, twisting the meaning of wisdom itself. And so the quiet struggle began, not outside but within him. Adam felt torn between what he knew and what he wondered. The light within him reminded him of the trust placed upon him, of the beauty of balance, of the gift of choice. But his mind was caught between reverence and curiosity, between peace and the pull of the unknown. It was a test unlike any before, a test of the heart. No? When he finally reached the tree, the air around it was still. The fruits glowed faintly, as if aware of his presence. The silence was heavy, and the whisper of temptation seemed to fade into his own thoughts. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling not with rebellion, but with wonder. The moment his fingers touched the fruit, the world itself seemed to shiver. The golden light of the garden dimmed, and the air grew still. He had crossed the boundary, and in that instant everything changed. The taste was not sweet or bitter. It was awakening. A veil lifted from his eyes, and he felt something he had never felt before: vulnerability. For the first time, he saw himself not as the perfect creation, but as flawed, exposed, incomplete. Awareness came like a storm, flooding his heart with confusion and regret. He understood the weight of choice, and with it came the ache of consequence. The garden, which had once sung in harmony, now echoed with silence. The wind no longer carried the same melody. The streams, once clear, reflected his sorrow. Adam felt the presence that had always surrounded him draw back, not in anger, but in distance, like the soft withdrawal of light before dusk. He was not abandoned, but he could feel the gravity of what he had done. The innocence that once wrapped around him like morning mist had lifted, replaced by the understanding of responsibility. He wandered the garden in silence, each step heavier than the last. He remembered the peace that had once filled his heart and longed for it again. Yet, deep within, he knew that the lesson was not about punishment, but awakening. The act had revealed something hidden within him: the power of choice, the fragility of obedience, and the reality that knowledge without humility leads to loss. No. The deceiver watched from afar, proud of the disruption he had caused. But even in his triumph, he did not understand the full design. For though Adam had stumbled, the fall itself would become the seed of a greater rise. Through mistake would come growth, through loss would come understanding, and through separation would come longing for reunion. As the light of the garden began to fade into twilight, Adam felt a deep sorrow, but also a quiet strength. He realized that though he had failed a command, he had discovered something profound within himself: the capacity to feel remorse, to seek forgiveness, to strive for return. This, too, was part of the purpose for which he was created. He looked at the world around him and saw that even in its dimming light, it was still beautiful. The flowers still bloomed, the rivers still ran, and the sky still shimmered with distant stars. It was as though creation itself was whispering to him, all is not lost. The divine presence that once surrounded him had not vanished. It had simply changed its form, moving from around him to within him. As the night of realization deepened, Adam bowed his head and wept, not for the loss of paradise, but for the distance he had created between his heart and the harmony of obedience. His tears fell upon the ground, and the earth absorbed them, becoming softer, more fertile. From that soil, new life would someday grow. In that moment, he understood that the path ahead would not be easy, but it would be meaningful. The journey that began in perfection would now move through trial. And through those trials, humanity would learn to return to the peace it once knew. The garden's gate did not close in cruelty. It closed in mercy. to begin a story of return. You know? The light of dawn crept once again over the horizon. The air was different now, no longer pure stillness, but touched with the scent of change. Adam stood at the edge of the garden, feeling both loss and hope. Behind him lay innocence, formerly destiny, though his steps would now lead him into a world of toil and sorrow. Within his heart burned the faint echo of that divine light, the same light that had once given him life. Oh, he walked forward, no longer only the first man, but the first traveler, bearing the story of choice, of fall, and of redemption. The garden faded into mist behind him, but its memory would live within every heart that sought to return to peace. For even in his fall, Adam carried within him the spark of hope, the promise that every return begins with a single step toward the light once lost, but never extinguished. The wind moved softly across the barren earth, carrying with it the scent of dust and the faint memory of paradise. The world outside the garden was unlike anything Adam had ever known. Gone were the shimmering rivers that sang with light. Gone were the trees that glowed with the warmth of heaven. The air was heavy, the ground uneven, and silence surrounded him like a cloak. Yet within that silence there was a strange kind of life, raw, untamed, and waiting to be shaped. The light that had once surrounded him now burned quietly within his heart, guiding his steps across this new and unfamiliar land. Gaul. He walked with a heavy heart, the memory of the garden still alive in his mind. Every breeze that brushed against his skin reminded him of what had been lost. But beneath the sorrow was a quiet determination. He understood now that his journey had only just begun. The lesson of the garden was not to crush him, but to awaken something deeper, the will to rebuild, to hope, and to rise. Though the gates of paradise had closed behind him, the path ahead was open, and it was through this world that he would learn what it truly meant to live, to strive, and to believe. The earth beneath his feet was rough and unshaped. Mountains stood like giants, rivers carved their way through stone, and storms rolled through the skies without warning. The harmony of the garden had been replaced with the wild pulse of nature. But even in this chaos, there was beauty. The stars shone brighter than ever before, and the sound of rain on the earth carried a rhythm that spoke of renewal. For the first time, Adam felt what it meant to work with his own hands, to plant, to build, to create. The land was not cruel, only waiting for care, and so he began to care for it as best as he could. He tilled the soil and gathered fruit from the trees that grew sparsely across the land. He built shelter from stone and branches, learning the patterns of the wind and the flow of the rain. Slowly, he began to understand the new world. It was not paradise, but it was alive, and it responded to his effort. When he worked, the earth gave. When he rested, the stars watched over him. There was hardship, yes, but also reward, a balance that spoke of purpose. Yet, in the quiet of the nights, he often sat beneath the sky and looked toward the stars. They reminded him of the light he once knew, the nearness of the divine, the peace of the garden. His heart longed for that closeness again, but he understood that longing was now part of his journey. Through it, he learned patience. Through patience, he found strength. The world was no longer a place of ease. It was a teacher, and every hardship a lesson written upon his soul. There were moments when sorrow overcame him. The silence could feel endless, and the memory of harmony sometimes burned like a wound. But even in those moments of loneliness, he began to feel something extraordinary, a voice not outside him, but within him. It was the quiet reminder that he was never truly alone. The same light that had given him life still flickered in his chest. It was faint, but steady. Every act of goodness, every moment of gratitude made it burn brighter. Time passed differently in this new world. The days and nights followed one another, and seasons began to shape the land. Adam learned the ways of time, How seeds sprout after rain, how the cold teaches endurance, and how the warmth of spring brings renewal. Each cycle reflected the rhythm of his own heart. Loss followed by growth, struggle followed by peace. He began to see that even outside the garden, creation still sang the same song, only in a different key. He found comfort in creation itself. The wind that once chilled him became his companion. The earth beneath his feet, once harsh, became his support. Even the distant thunder reminded him that power and mercy could coexist. Slowly, he began to see the wisdom in his journey. Paradise had been perfection. This world was possibility. It was a place where faith could grow through effort, where hope could be built by hands and heart together. As time went on, he built more than shelter. He built meaning. He began to understand that his fall was not an ending, but a beginning. He had been sent into the world not as punishment, but as purpose. Every seed he planted, every act of gratitude, every moment of reflection became part of something greater. The earth was not silent anymore. It responded to him with growth and life. Even in its thorns and storms, there was the whisper of grace. At times he would gaze at the horizon where the sun met the land. The golden light reminded him of the garden, of what he had lost, but also of what still remained. For though he could not return to that perfect peace, he carried its memory in his heart. It became his guide, his compass. The more he worked, the more he prayed, the more he felt that the distance between him and the divine was not measured in space, but in sincerity. Through struggle, he learned humility. Through effort, he found gratitude, and through both, he rediscovered peace. It was not the same peace as before, not the effortless harmony of the garden, but a deeper and peace born of endurance. The pain of loss had softened into wisdom. The weight of regret had transformed into purpose. He no longer walked as one cast out, but as one sent forth. He began to see the beauty in imperfection, the cracks in the earth where water gathered, the broken stones that became shelter, the withered trees that gave space for new ones to grow. All spoke to him of renewal. He realized that perfection was not the absence of struggle, but the courage to rise after it. The divine plan was not just in paradise, it was in the journey itself. The world around him slowly began to reflect that realization. Flowers bloomed where once the ground was barren. The rivers ran clearer, and the winds carried the scent of life. It was as though the earth responded to his faith, as if creation itself recognized his perseverance. He had fallen, yes, but in rising again, he had fulfilled what was written within him, the capacity to learn, to love, and to return. And so, as the sun set one evening, painting the sky in colors he had never seen before, Adam stood in silence and felt peace. The stars above seemed closer, and the wind carried the soft echo of the garden, not as memory, but as promise. He understood now that paradise was not only a place behind him, but a state that could live within him. Every act of kindness, every moment of patience, every breath of gratitude brought him closer to that light again. He closed his eyes and felt the earth beneath him steady and alive. The same soil from which he had been formed now supported his every step. The journey from light to darkness, from fall to awakening, had come full circle, and in that moment of stillness, he realized that he had never truly been far from the Creator. He had simply been learning to see him in a different way.